Good morning, everyone. You're going to find out in a minute why I'm wearing a cowboy hat. Uh, so, back in 2003, I think it was, I was teaching a graduate class in creative writing at St. Mary's College. And there was a guy in that class that, I can't remember where he was from, but he was a very interesting guy. Came from a real poor working class family and had managed to work his way up to doing some pretty amazing things with his life. But anyway, he kept telling me that I needed to read True Grit. And I thought the guy was nuts. I mean, I only knew of True Grit, of course, from the movie, which was at that time the only one out was the John Wayne version, and I liked the movie, but just couldn't imagine that the book was anything special. But he just kept saying, you've got to read it. You're gonna be blown away by this thing. So anyway, I finally gave in and took his advice. I read the book, and Charles Portis was a genius. The guy wrote incredibly simple but emotionally powerful prose. For those of you that know the story, it's told from the point of view of a 14-year-old girl, and he captures her voice. I mean, this character is amazing. Mattie Ross. She's determined. She's smart. She's aggressive. Very just not afraid to voice an opinion. So this is actually going to be kind of a long reading because I want to get the whole first section in here because you just really can't cut it off at any point during this beginning, but it's brilliant. And if anyone hasn't read this, I strongly encourage you to pick it up. People do not give it credence that a 14-year-old girl could leave home and go off in the wintertime to avenge her father's blood. But it did not seem strange then, although I will say it did not happen every day. I was just 14 years of age when a coward going by the name of Tom Cheney shot my father down in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and robbed him of his life and his horse and $150 in cash money, plus 2 California gold pieces that he carried in his trouser band. Here is what happened. We had a clear title to 480 acres of good bottomland on the south bank of the Arkansas River, not far from Dardanelle in Yell County, Arkansas. Tom Cheney was a tenant, but working for hire and not on shares. He turned up one day hungry and riding a gray horse that had a filthy blanket on his back and a rope halter instead of a bridle. Papa took pity on the fellow and gave him a job and a place to live. It was a cotton house made over into a little cabin. It had a good roof. Tom Cheney said he was from Louisiana. He was a short man with cruel features. I will tell you more about his face later. He carried a Henry rifle. He was a bachelor, about 25 years of age. In November, when the last of the cotton was sold, Papa took it in his head to go to Fort Smith and buy some ponies. He had heard that a stock trader there named Colonel Stonehill had bought a large parcel of cow ponies from Texas drovers on their way to Kansas and was now stuck with them. He was getting shed of them at bargain rates as he did not want to feed them over the winter. People in Arkansas did not think much of Texas Mustang ponies. They were little and mean. They had never had anything but grass to eat and did not weigh over 800 pounds. Papa had no idea they would make good deer hunting ponies, being hardy and small and able to keep up with the dogs through the brush. He thought he would buy a small string of them, and if things worked out, he would breed and sell them for that purpose. His head was full of schemes. Anyway, it would be cheap enough investment to start with, and we had a patch of winter oats and plenty of hay to see the ponies through till spring, when they could graze in our big north pasture and feed on greener and juicier clover than they ever saw in the Lone Star State. As I recollect, shelled corn was something under 15 cents a bushel then. Papa intended for Tom Cheney to stay and look after things on the place while he was gone. But Cheney set up a fuss to go, and after a time he got the best of Pa's good nature. If Papa had a falling out, it was kindly disposition. If Papa had a failing, it was his kindly disposition. People would use him. I did not get my mean streak from him. Frank Ross was the great, gentlest, most honorable man who ever lived. He had a common school education. He was a Cumberland Presbyterian and a Mason, and he fought with determination at the Battle of Elkhorn Tavern, but was not wounded in that scrap, as Lucille Biggers Langford states in her Yell County Yesterdays. I think I am in a position to know the facts. He was hurt in the terrible fight at the Chickamauga up on the state of Tennessee, and came near to dying on the way home from want of proper care. Before Papa left for Fort Smith, he arranged for a colored man named Yarnell Poindexter to feed the stock and look in on Mama and us every day. Yarnell and his family lived just below us on some land he rented from the bank. He was born of free parents in Illinois, but a man named Bloodworth kidnapped him in Missouri and brought him up down to Arkansas just before the war. Yarnell was a good man, thrifty and industrious, and he later became a prosperous house painter in Memphis, Tennessee. We exchanged letters every Christmas until he passed away in the flu epidemic of 1918. To this day, I have never met anybody else named Yarnell, white or black. I attended the funeral and visited in Memphis with my brother, little Frank, and his family. Instead of going to Fort Smith by steamboat or train, Papa decided he would go on horseback and walk the ponies back all tied together. Not only would it be cheaper, but it would be a pleasant outing for him and a good ride. Nobody loved to gad about on a prancing steed more than Papa. I've never been very fond of horses myself, although I believe I was accounted a good enough rider in my youth. I never was afraid of animals. I remember once I rode a mean goat through a plum thicket on a dare. From our place in Fort Smith to Fort Smith was about 70 miles as a bird flies, taking you past beautiful Mount Nebo, where we had a little summer house so Mama could get away from the mosquitoes, and also Mount Magazine, the highest point in Arkansas. But it might as well have been 700 miles for all I know of Fort Smith. The boats went up there, and some people sold their cotton up there, but that was all I knew about it. We sold our cotton down in Little Rock. I had been there 2 or 3 times. Papa left us on his saddle horse, a big chestnut mare with a blazed face called Judy. He took some food and a change of clothes, rolled up in some blankets and covered with a slicker. This was tied behind his saddle. He wore his belt gun, which was a big, long dragoon pistol, the cap and ball kind that was old-fashioned even at that time. He had carried it in the war. He was a handsome sight in my memory's eye. I can still see him mounted up there on Judy in his brown woolen coat and black Sunday hat, and the both of them, man and beast, blowing little clouds of steam on that frosty morn. He might have been a gallant knight of old. Tom Cheney rode his gray horse that was better suited to pulling a middle buster than in carrying a rider. He had no handgun, but he carried his rifle slung across his back on a piece of cotton plow line. There is trash for you. He could have taken an old piece of harness and made a nice leather strap for it. That would have been too much trouble. Papa had right around $250 in his purse, as I had reason to know since I kept his books for him. Mama was never any good at sums, and she could hardly spell cat. I do not boast of my own gifts in that direction. Figures and letters are not everything. Like Martha, I have always been agitated and troubled by the cares of the day, but my mother had a serene and loving heart. She was like Mary and had chosen that good part. The 2 gold pieces that Papa carried concealed in his clothes were a marriage gift from my grandfather Sperling in Monterey, California. Little did Papa realize that morning that he was never to see us or hold us again, nor would he ever again hearken to the meadowlarks of Yell County trilling a joyous anthem to spring. The news came like a thunderclap. Here is what happened. Papa and Tom Cheney arrived in Fort Smith and took a room at the Monarch boarding house. They called on Stonehill at his stock barn and looked over the ponies. It fell out that there was not a mare in the lot, or a stallion for that matter. The Texas cowboys rode nothing but geldings for some cowboy reason of their own, and you can imagine they are no good for breeding purposes. But Papa was not to be turned back. He was determined to own some of these little brutes, and on the second day, he bought 4 of them for $100 even, bringing Stonehill down from his asking price of $140. It was a good enough buy. They made plans to leave the next morning. That night, Tom Cheney went to a bar room and got into a game of cards with some riffraff like himself and lost his wages. He did not take the loss like a man, but went back to the room at the boarding house and sold up like a possum. He had a bottle of whiskey and he drank that. Papa was sitting in the parlor talking to some drummers. By and by, Cheney came out of the bedroom with his rifle. He said he had been cheated and was going back to the barroom to get his money. Papa said if he had been cheated, then they had best go talk to the law about it. Cheney would not listen. Papa followed him outside and told him to surrender the rifle as he was in no fit state to start a quarrel with a gun in his hand. My father was not armed at the time. Tom Cheney raised his rifle and shot him in the forehead, killing him instantly. There was no more provocation than that, and I tell it as it was told to me by the High Sheriff of Sebastian County. Some people might say, well, what business was it of Frank Ross to meddle? My answer is this. He was trying to do that short devil a good turn. Cheney was a tenant, and Papa felt responsibility. He was his brother's keeper. Does that answer your question? Now, the drummers did not rush out to grab Cheney or shoot him, but instead scattered like poultry, while Cheney took my father's purse from his warm body and ripped open the trouser band and took the gold pieces too. I cannot say how he knew about them. When he finished his thieving, he raced to the end of the street and struck the night watchman at the stock barn a fierce blow to the mouth with his rifle stock, knocking him silly. He put a bridle on Papa's horse Judy and rode out bareback. Darkness swallowed him up. He might have taken the time to saddle the horse or hitched up 3 spans of mules to a Concord stagecoach and smoked a pipe, as it seems no one in that city was after him. He had mistaken the drummers for men. Quote, the wicked flee when none pursueth. Unquote. True Grit, Charles Portis. Oh, and watch the Jeff Bridges version of the movie. It's way better than the John Wayne one. Thanks. Have a great day.